The Chaser Report is recorded on Gadigal land.
Striving for mediocrity in a world of excellence. This is the Chaser Report.
Hello and welcome to the Chaser Report. Today it is me, Dom, and Chris Taylor steps up to the microphone. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Dom. It's been far too long since I've appeared on the Chaser Report podcast. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure to have you. Big day. We're sitting recording this as the UK election results filter through, and it seems to be official that Keir Starmer, Sir Keir, to give him his full title,
is this the bombshell twist of all bombshell twists? I mean, the polls were, I think, predicting a massive Sunak victory. No, of course, it's very much gone according to the script. I think everyone's just been talking about the size of the landslide. As we go to air, as it were, on the podcast, he's certainly formed government, Keir Starmer. Yeah. Sir Keir Starmer.
Sir Keir. That very down-to-earth Labor leader.
Well, isn't this the funny thing about the election? That you've got the person of colour being the Tory candidate, where normally Labor would be seen as the party of diversity. And on the leader of the Labor Party is knighted, Sir Keir Starmer.
He's actually from a working class.
Knighted for services to boredom?
That's right.
For being a non-entity?
He used to run the Crown Prosecutor's Office, I think. He's from a humble background, but he was a barrister, and so he learned his plummy accent. Wherever he's from, he ditched the accent pretty quickly and got a barrister accent. Yeah, so he sounds very flash, but he's apparently from humble origins.
He is, and from very much a Labor family, and the bulk of the law he practiced, I understand. He was part of Geoffrey Robertson's chambers.
He was, that's right. It
was human rights law. So I know it was controversial sort of halfway into his career when he sort of went to the other side, as it were, and headed up the DPP, the prosecutions. But no, he was always a great champion of the underdog in human rights. So,
which of course now as Labor leader he's had to put on hold when it comes to the Middle East.
Yes, it's sort of odd sitting in Australia following this. There might have been a time 10 or 15 years ago where it would be, even bigger news than it currently is because the apron strings were very much tighter and closer. Yeah. And, Britain does still play a reasonable part, I guess, in our life and in our alliances and even some of our cultural life. But it's sort of, we've sort of been following this. Circus is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. The Fatima Payman saga unfold in Australian politics, and that sort of low level sort of government bumbling, if bumbling's the right word to describe that, or can I? But when you look at what the Tories have done in the UK for the last, is it 15 years? How long?
14, yeah.
14 years. It's proper chef's kiss gift to comedians, isn't it? It's just been leader after leader, each with their own fatal flaw or comic crutch.
Yeah, let's recap some of the highlights of Tory rule in a moment here on the Chaser Report. Obviously, with Boris Johnson, there's a lot to talk about with Liz Truss versus the lettuce. That was pretty special. Theresa May had some moments.
Theresa May,
and even David Cameron and the pig. That's a whole story.
Well, so where do we begin? Whenever I, get a little bit blue or sort of feel a bit off or unmotivated of it, my favourite go-to political clip, if I ever want to cheer up, are clips of Theresa May dancing.
Really?
Someone once described it. I don't know if it was Marina Hyde, that
probably
great
was,
Guardian columnist, or it might have been Charlie Brooker. It was, one of those people with a brilliant British turn of phrase. They described Theresa May as looking like a Quentin Blake drawing. Quentin Blake, the Roald Dahl artist.
Yeah.
And she does, and when she dances, there is just whatever rhythm is, she has the opposite of it. Like it's all stiff arms and no sense of understanding what the music's doing or where the beat is. And for some reason, for someone that had no discernible skill as a dancer, she danced quite a lot in public life.
And they say dance like no one is watching.
And she did.
And that's not easy to do when the world's television cameras are pointed at you. But congratulations to her. I mean, she reminds me in her commitment to the arts, Chris, to creativity, no matter what lack of talent. Really the wife of the most recent Governor-General, who was known for singing at every possible occasion. He's the only person who comes close to it, I think.
Could they get together? Could they get some sort of arts grant? Or maybe they don't need the money. They could just, fund it themselves. A song and dance sort of show. They could take it to Edinburgh or the Adelaide Cabaret Festival where Teresa does the
Hurley
moves.
does the song.
And Linda Hurley does the singing.
Oh,
I'd pay to see that.
That would be very entertaining, wouldn't it? No, that'd be a wonderful double act. And Theresa May needs things to do. I mean, Theresa May's whole deal was, if I remembered it all, it's all a bit of a blur now, but her whole thing was, you might remember David Cameron, there was a whole thing about when a member of the Bullingdon Club. And this is not a great question to be asked of a world leader. Did he fuck a pig? I mean, that was, it reminds me of the old...
Was it fuck a pig or place his penis in the mouth of a dead pig?
It's an important point. No, it was a dead pig.
The pig was dead. We all agree the pig was dead.
It's important to notice this thing.
Was it a roast pig, sort of suckling pig served?
A sucking pig, in fact.
Or was it, had they been out hunting and bagged themselves a pig?
All right, let me just dive into this because this is one of the highlights of Tory rule. But it speaks
I love
so
on the
much.
day of the re-emergence of Labor, we're going back to the pig story.
We're saying farewell to 14 years of Tory rule, as Britain has. And I mean, everyone I saw on the Channel 4 coverage was, including the rest of politics guys, they were talking about all the scandals that had mounted. And there were Tory peers from the House of Lords saying, I'm so glad they're gone because of all the scandals. So, all right, let me just give you the quote here from The Guardian, from Nadia Kamani, where he wrote that one specific allegation is that, in the words of the Daily Mail, Cameron took part in an initiation ceremony in which he put a private part of his anatomy into a dead pig's mouth.
How many private parts are there of the anatomy?
Yeah. For men, there's not many.
No, I've got it down to one.
Yeah, that's right. So, and there's a current MP has seen photographic evidence, apparently, and this is the Piers Gaveston Society at Oxford University. So, I mean, at the point where your drinking club is named after someone literally called Piers, you know you're a bit posh, basically.
So that's interesting because I always wondered if it was one of these sort of runaway apocryphal stories, a bit like the Engadine Macca's story that haunted ScoMo.
Yes, but no one actually believed that was true. That was why it was so much fun.
It was almost too interesting.
Yeah, that's right.
Whereas people did sort of believe the pig story, and what you've just read out seems to imply there is photographic evidence of the private part in the mouth
Someone
of the dead
says
pig.
they've seen it. An MP says that they've seen it, not on the record. But it was in the Daily Mail, which is a huge supporter of the Tories. Well, they wouldn't have liked David Cameron. So David Cameron, probably his highlight of his entire time as Prime Minister was that story. But then he made the calculation, Chris, as you recall, that the way to stop people banging on about leaving the European Union was to bring the matter to the vote. Now, he did this with Scotland. He gave Scotland the chance to leave the United Kingdom.
And they just won that.
Narrowly scraped ahead in that one and thought, I'm pretty good at this narrowly scraping ahead and, silencing my opponent's thing. Let's bring it on with Brexit.
Which, to be fair to him, was a fair
the polls were saying
calculation.
That's what
no one really thought Brexit was going to happen.
No.
When it was called.
When it was called. And that was 2016, one of the really early cases of all the misinformation going around. But also, you've got to ask yourself who bothers to vote. It's not compulsory voting over there. And the people who voted for Brexit overwhelmingly were the people living in the economically depressed, poor countries who hated immigrants and yet, ironically, were receiving the most benefits from the EU.
Yeah,
they're all on massive welfare from the EU. And then David Cameron just basically self-immolated. He left while whistling. We've got the clip here, actually, of him just singing to himself after he announced his resignation as Prime Minister. He sort of went and wandered off.
Thank you very much. Right.
And then we got Theresa May.
The dancer. It's someone. I heard someone describe Cameron's decision to call that referendum as the greatest miscalculation ever made by a Prime Minister. And look, in hindsight, obviously, I mean, even people who voted for Brexit now, I think, acknowledge that it's been a disaster.
Even The Economist now says it's a total disaster.
Yeah, and interestingly, during this election that's just happened in the UK, there's widespread sort of agreement that Brexit's been the worst thing happened. But neither side of either the Tory or Labor has it as their policy to reverse it.
Absolutely. Keir Starmer actually just said, not during my lifetime will Brexit happen. So,
or reverse Brexit.
Sorry, not during my lifetime will we leave Brexit. Yeah. So pretty huge call given what an absolute shit.
Yeah, and look, I don't understand it enough to know how easy it is. Is it like sort of when, I don't know, you've driven down into a cul-de-sac and you've got to do a it's not a
6-point
3-point turn, it's a 6 or 13-point turn. Is it that hard just to reverse it all? Because we all remember it was such a nightmare to even get the deal.
It was very
in the
hard
first
to
place.
get out of it.
So presumably it's quite hard to rejoin,
It's
even
full-
though every sensible, intelligent person who understands Brexit's impact is saying UK needs to.
Yeah,
I
well,
almost
there's-
said we then.
There's a
the
lot
UK
of
needs
things,
to rejoin the EU.
There's a lot of things that are easy about it. Like in order to leave Brexit, they had to do all these things like put up border controls between the UK and Europe that weren't there before, and they had to introduce all these kind of bodies that weren't there before that they'd outsourced, because a lot of bureaucracy was sent to Brussels. A lot of regulations.
Yes.
The whole thing about how bent your banana has to be was an exaggeration, but the Europeans did do a lot of stuff collectively. But so I don't know how hard it would be to leave. But the strange thing is, the Liberal Democrats, the centrist party, have absolutely said we're going to un-Brexit. But no, the others are not willing to
The
go
others
there.
are not, even though they acknowledge it would be better for the country. I thought it's interesting. You're saying if Starmer gets 2 or 3 terms, he's not going to do it in.
Well,
he's
you
saying
never
that
know.
now.
He's saying that now. So Theresa May, just to you've mentioned the dancing.
Yes.
But the hilarious, and I can't remember the details now, but I followed it closely at the time. The hilarious ineptness of her attempt to get Brexit done. She tried so hard. She achieved so little. And that was the one thing. She could not get it done. And so in the end, she had to yield to Boris Johnson, one of the world's most hopeless men.
With one of the world's most extraordinary haircuts.
Yes, with an incredible haircut. And Chris, you mentioned the Theresa May video being your happy place.
Yeah.
My equivalent of that is the video, and you know the one I can see
Is
in your
this
face.
when he's up on the harness? Yeah.
It's when he's doing the zip line.
When he was the mayor of London.
When the mayor of London, during the, I think it went in something to do with the Olympics.
Yes.
And he's going down the zip line, he's got the helmet on, he's got a Union Jack in each hand, and he gets stuck. And he's like, can someone get me down? And
It's going well. It's very, very well organised. What they do, get me a ladder.
that is fantastic. I mean,
love-
being marooned in the middle of nowhere is such a great symbol for Britain under Boris
That's
Johnson.
the thing. I love it when real life serves up a metaphor for what's happening. And it doesn't happen all that often, but occasionally it does. And that's one of the classics, isn't it? Where he's literally suspended, unable to do anything. And now, the Johnson, well, where do you begin to unpack Johnson?
Well,
Johnson was the Prime Minister of COVID.
The parties in the garden were quite something.
Partygate
Partygate.
really was his undoing, and it was just lie after lie after lie. I mean, people sort of expect it from Trump, and no, Trump's always lying, but Johnson, I reckon, was as big a liar as Trump, especially around the Partygate situation, which is where, like most countries, they put very strict rules and regulations in place about movement during COVID, and where you had to be, and where you had to be locked down, and all of that.
He put a lot of these regulations in place.
He told the poor and everyone else in England, one trip to the shops a day, no socialising whatsoever. And yet, who was breaking open the champagne and cracking open cigars every other night? It seemed at 10 Downing Street, but none other than Boris Johnson and his party, having wild parties in Downing Street.
Parties. And one of the things
No pigs
that
we know
of. It's not clear. They didn't live to tell the
Maybe
tale.
David Cameron took them all when he
Well, he's back in the government now, so I can only
He is.
assume. Do you think he's like a rock band where there's a rider and he insists on a few pigs? But the detail that people might forget in Partygate, which I've always found the most extraordinary aspect of it, is it's not just that he imposed all these rules and then completely broke them, and it was a massive hypocrite. I mean, that's kind of not that unusual for a politician. But it's the fact that one of the parties was held the evening before the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. So there's supposed to be a time of national mourning, and they're going, this man who's served his country by being quiet next to the Queen and telling terrible jokes whenever asked, was there. And the Queen, you might remember, it was actually quite, even if you don't like the Queen very much, it was quite touching watching her in the service.
In mourning, yes.
Yeah, she was there alone. Sitting alone because her one person in her bubble was in the coffin there, and there was no one who could actually sit next to her. So no one could comfort her because of the COVID rules. So she sat there following the COVID rules, not knowing that the very night before, her Prime Minister and team had been having absolute shindig at number 10.
It's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
And just the audacity of sort of denying it for so long. And then, again, a bit like, it's sort of the amount of times British politics does actually reflect or mirror an episode of The Thick of It, or feel like it. Like, I think they'd give a press conference one day denying that there were any parties, and the next day just photos would emerge of not just people gathering, but literally canapes, cakes.
He would just deny anything. But this is a man we don't even know how many children he has.
Well,
because of his habit of impregnating various
What was
women.
that story again? There was a sort of paternity.
I was multiple
saga.
paternity businesses going, and people say there may have been more. I think it's 6 or 7, but we don't entirely know. His current wife is a Conservative Party staffer who he was sleeping with on the side.
Barnaby staff.
Barnaby style, yeah. It's
Yeah.
very. I mean, Barnaby is very much a sort of lesser rural Boris Johnson in many ways.
Yeah. Well, there's talk, isn't there, that, after the absolute bloodbath that the Tories have just copped, and Sunak, I assume, will go. We don't know if he's held his own seat at this point.
Well, we should actually just briefly sidebar on that. Is that you mentioned that Brexit was the worst decision ever by a PM, but it may have been topped by Rishi Sunak's decision to call this election because he didn't have to go now. He could have gone in 6 months.
Are you saying they would have had a better chance in 6 months' time? 'Cause
It's hard to know.
After 14 years of collective mistrust with the people, with all the scandals, all the gaffes, all the farcical, disorganised rule, I can't imagine they could have turned that ship around in 6 months.
Maybe they couldn't. So
What I do think was again, we were talking about metaphors with Johnson earlier. I loved when Sunak did call the election.
Yes.
He went out in front of number 10 and it was in pissing wet rain. And just the optics of that, like a drip call in an
Yes,
election.
that's right.
Covered in water as if, even God's not on your side right now.
And we should also play a little clip of this. It's also worth noting that as he was calling the election and getting absolutely drenched by the rain, some chaser-style comedian in the background was playing on a boombox "Things Can Only Get Better," the anthem of Tony Blair's election.
To decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament.
You can hear on the microphones. The song. What an inept man.
I did that lazy thing of reading the headline about that, but not reading the article. I thought it was actually coming from number 10.
That would have been great.
Staffer had a boombox on.
It could have been a staffer. Well, I'm not entirely sure who it was.
The Chaser Report. More news, less often.
The gossip I had from friends in London, Chris, is that the new school year begins in California in August or something, and his wife, he probably did well to do as well as he did, given that his wife famously is a billionaire who doesn't pay tax.
Yes.
So to actually have any sort of showing is probably...
So that's the reason for the time.
That's the rumour, is that he just wanted to get out of there so the kids could start their new school in America. He just wants to leave the UK. We don't know if he's won his seat at the time of recording, but we
some
do
big
know...
names have lost their seats.
Yep.
Penny Mordaunt.
Penny Mordaunt.
Now, for non-Penny Mordaunt fans, I know there's a lot of Penny Mordaunt fans of the podcast.
Sure.
Most Australians probably know Penny Mordaunt as the woman that held the sword during King Charles' coronation.
Yes, that's right.
And she was sort of dressed in this, look, it was quite a striking outfit,
Wow.
but it looked a little bit, I want to say, like as if she'd been dressed by a theatre company wardrobe department.
Yes.
It was sort of a bit sci-fi, a modern take on medieval dress, holding the sword, doing it really, really well. It didn't look like a light sword.
She was very committed to the sword.
Bloody good sword
She could
work.
easily have beheaded somebody with that.
So the question now, if not that we'd wish it on him, but if King Charles does pass away during this next term of government,
Ooh.
and there's a new coronation, Penny Mordaunt's not around to hold the sword.
I mean...
Now, can you name one person from Labor that could hold that sword?
No, not at this.
I can't name any people
Jeremy
from Labor.
Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn was returned.
Jeremy Corbyn,
but I
he
think
was
he's an
returned.
independent now.
Yes,
isn't he?
that's true. He's independent. So there's a whole... We won't have time to get into this, but there's a whole thing where Labor lost quite a lot of seats due to Gaza, and there were pro-Palestinian candidates who split the vote.
The side that won in a landslide actually lost some seats.
They lost some
to
seats.
independents.
Yeah.
Greens.
There's Ian Duncan Smith, former Conservative leader, at one point. He managed to retain his seat only because the vote was split between a disendorsed Labor candidate who was fairly pro-Gaza and another woman of colour who was also running for Labor. They got about, I think, 12,000 votes each. Yeah, right. And Duncan Smith got 17,000. They don't have preferential voting like we did. So obviously, had they had preferencing, they would have defeated Duncan Smith. But anyway, so it's an interesting thing in light of Payman. There's going to be potentially an electoral consequence for Albo.
Well, what's sort of taking a step back, what sort of strikes me as particularly interesting about this election and the huge surge towards a party of the left is how it runs counter to global trends at the moment. We've got Marine Le Pen in France. Europe generally is going very
Italy.
right, not just right, like far right. Anti-immigration is really cutting through. You've got Trump, obviously, in America. Netanyahu and Israel. So there's this big populist tide. And yet somehow it sort of speaks to just how bad the Conservatives were in England that they couldn't ride that tide. Because I think, the same people that voted for Brexit would traditionally vote Tory and would love, or possibly now have moved to reform.
Moved to reform. And Nigel Farage, I think it's 8th time lucky he's managed to be elected.
He's finally got a seat.
Got a seat.
And I think I've only seen some early figures on Farage, but I think I saw some very strong numbers for reform.
Yeah,
I think,
but again,
in their third
system,
highest vote after Labor and Conservative. Maybe the Lib Dems.
I think they might well outpoll the Lib Dems, but it's hard to know. But they won't win many seats because of the UK system. So, and this will be a conversation that happens. They've won at least 2 or 3 seats.
Is this a first past the post?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's whoever wins the most number of votes, the biggest total in the first round wins, even if you only get 20% of the vote. Just whoever's got the most in the first round. And so that really hurts reform. They may talk about changing it. They've looked at the Australian system and rejected going to that. But so Nigel Farage has promised a wave of being the real opposition. He sees himself as the actual opposition leader. And there are some in the Conservatives who want to bring him in.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised. But, consistent with that big groundswell of support for populism elsewhere around the world, particularly in Europe and America, that I suspect that Farage will get bigger before he gets smaller.
Oh, absolutely. The time suit him.
Now, Dommy, what can we expect from the Keir Starmer Labor government? Because what I'm nervous about, I kind of like that he's not larger than life. I think we are ready just for everyone just to take a breath and have a sensible pair of hands, a boring guy in charge.
A boring guy in charge. Well, let's look at the Starmer government in a moment. But before we do, while we complete our survey of the departed prime ministers, this is just broken while we've been doing the podcast. We need to take a moment to commemorate Liz Truss, who was beaten not only by a lettuce but by Labor.
I am a fighter and not a quitter. I cannot deliver the mandate. I am resigning.
She just lost her seat.
Liz Truss has lost her seat.
In a seat where Reform got 10,000 votes. So she's lost the seat of, it seems, Southwest Norfolk, and I don't know what she does with the rest of her life. Liz Truss, of course, I think the only thing she managed during her time in number 10, Chris, was to kill the Queen. She went to see the Queen once.
Yes.
The Queen died shortly afterwards.
Yeah, and I always think, if nothing else, Liz Truss will be the answer to a very difficult trivia question in about 20 years' time, which was, who was the British Prime Minister who spoke at the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II? And the answer is Liz Truss.
Yes.
It just for the 2 minutes that she was in office, the Queen happened to die. I'm not
43
saying there was a link.
days? Yeah.
How many days was it?
43 maybe,
43
something like that.
felt
it wasn't
shorter
very
than
long.
that.
Did she give the Queen COVID? I don't know, but they did have at least one audience, person to person.
She was, like Theresa May, she was a bad mover. Now, not a bad dance mover, but very stiff speaker.
49 days, I'm just verifying.
49 days. And amazingly, for someone trying to sort of unite the country and turn the fortunes of the Tory party around, the one thing she did do in that very short tenure was release a budget which quite proudly championed tax cuts for the rich and tax rises for the poor.
Yeah, it was the mini budget. The Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. Again, the Tories are very diverse.
I guess the base or
the lettuce. I don't know who it was, but no, a massive implosion. It was a little bit like what happened to Tony Abbott more slowly after the Knights and Dames. Just one moment of absolute self-defeat, and austerity had already really smashed Britain. Matt Bevan's podcast is really good on this. If you're listening, there's an episode, Who Broke Britain, looking at austerity and how it backfired. But no, she was basically doubling it, I don't know, quadrupling or octupling down on austerity and cutting everything.
Oh, it was insane. And then sort of wondering why that didn't play well with the hurting British public. Liz Truss will be a footnote. It's hard to mourn her loss today in some ways.
We barely knew her, Chris.
Yeah, I guess she's a sympathetic figure in the sense that, unlike Sunak, she's not married to a billionaire.
No,
so what's her exit strategy?
She's probably got good super. She'll get put in the House of Lords by some future.
And as I said, she will always be the answer to a trivia question somewhere.
So perhaps she can get a percentage from Trivial Pursuit. I don't know. So she's gone. Sunak has kept his seat, except that he'll probably leave almost immediately.
Right. So the one guy that retained his seat
yes.
has decided to go.
And this is the guy who, I mean, among his many campaign gaffes, there's a good Guardian podcast on this featuring Marina Hyde looking at all the gaffes of Sunak's campaign.
Oh, great.
But the rain was one. Ducking out early on the D-Day celebrations to do an interview with ITV back in London. And so, I mean, Biden was still awake at that point in the commemorations. And
Biden would have liked to leave, but it was just too much effort. he was probably asleep.
And then the other great thing is he was asked what he had to do without as a child, the thing that how deprived he was as a child and so on. And bearing in mind he's married to a billionaire, and his claim was that he had to do without Sky cable television.
What did you go without as a child?
Lots of things, right?
Can you give me an example?
All sorts of things. Like lots of people, there'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV.
That was the thing he was missing out on.
I saw, in one of those other light interviews, it might have been on one of the morning shows, he was asked, what's your election night meal going to be? And he looked genuinely stumped and and apparently Sunak's not a food person. He's just,
really?
For someone who can afford the best meals ever created by the finest chefs, he's not into food. He goes, well, I quite like sandwiches.
Maybe it was supposed to be a trap and they thought he'd mentioned, I don't know, samosas or something. I don't know. It is quite extraordinary. Srila Braverman, Priti Patel, Rishi Sunak, a lot of senior Tories, Kwasi Kwarteng, who are people of colour, and it seems to be fine.
Yeah.
So amazingly less racist, some might say, than certain other countries. Final gaffe from Rishi that I love is he went to Wales to campaign in Wales.
Wales, by the way, I was reading before we hopped on, went entirely Labour. I don't think there's a single Conservative seat in Wales.
Well, I think I can explain this. Right. He went to Wales to campaign, Sunak, and asked voters if they were looking forward to watching the Euro football tournament, which is not at the moment. Wales failed to qualify for the Euros, and they're quite bitter about it. So yes, not his greatest work. So that's Rishi Sunak. Just on Keir Starmer, we're almost out of time, Chris, but on what the Starmer administration will do, I mean, I'm fairly up on this because I've been listening fairly obsessively to The Rest is Politics, which I really recommend. The answer is it's actually going to be very...
I reckon they're very grateful for our recommendation because they're struggling for listeners.
It is number one podcast in the UK.
In the world, I think, isn't it?
Quite possibly.
Politics podcast,
Joe Rogan, I think, still has the numbers on them globally, but no, very, very big. But they're disappointed in how little he wants to do. He wants to balance the budget. It's kind of Albo-esque, really. Very small target, don't frighten the horses, don't do very much, and nothing particularly radical to tackle cost of living, even though that's a huge problem in the UK. So
here's my prediction, because I reckon the last time we had Labor in, it was called New Labor, it was Tony Blair.
New Labor, yes. Britpop and...
driven by Alistair Campbell, one of the co-hosts of the aforementioned podcast.
Indeed.
Last time Labor had the reins, we went to war.
Oh, yes. And he was intimately involved in that.
So I'm wondering if Keir Starmer has a war in him. It's this funny, it's almost a paradox or something where, because Trump the same is quite anti-war and pacifist.
Yeah.
And
it's one of his few good points.
Whereas Obama, was never shy about dropping a drone into Yemen and that kind of thing. And the same thing, say what you like about Sunak and Johnson and all of that, but I don't think they started any wars. Whereas Tony Blair started a famously bad one. I'm not putting it past Sir Keir Starmer. Who do we reckon it's going to be?
Well, it's
Wales.
They're
an ally.
Maybe on America to get Rishi Sunak's money back. But no, look, one of the major strands in UK politics, for which Australia can take credit, I think, one of the big debates in recent years has been the notion of taking people who arrived by boat and dumping them in an unpleasant country. Yes. So it's Rwanda. Now, Keir Starmer says he'll end Rishi Sunak's Rwanda deal, where
that was asylum seekers
gets their version of Stop the Boats is ship them all off to Rwanda on planes.
So he will be better on that.
So Starmer says he'll stop that deal.
Great.
But it could be that he's going to stop that deal by invading Rwanda. By which point he won't be sending them to Rwanda, he'll be sending them to Britain. Right. I don't know what he's going to do, but we'll see.
He'll have some surprises in store, I'm sure, but hopefully not many, because as I said, I think the sigh of relief you can hear from all the way over in the UK is largely just for politics to briefly return to uneventfulness. Like it won't necessarily be normal ever again, but they just don't want it to be eventful,
to be ridiculous.
They don't want anyone stuck up on the pulley system there, waving Union Jacks. They don't want anyone announcing things in the rain. They just sort of want a return to a very British, repressed, emotionless way of life.
With a knight of the realm at the helm of the country. Well, I think the one thing we can say about Sir Keir Starmer, and look, I can't say that I know him all that well, but he does not look like the kind of person who would throw a party at number 10. And frankly, if he did throw a party, I don't know that anyone would want to go to it. You can guarantee that change. Chris, it's been so nice having you on.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Our gear is from Rode. We're part of the Iconoclast Network, and we'll catch you some formulation of us, possibly the two of us, catch you tomorrow on The Chaser Report.